Welcome back. This is week 5, lecture 2, which is reviewing slash preparing, or I think it's maybe preparing slash review for the midterm. At the end of lecture 1 for this week, I said I would be back shortly to give you, I hope, some insight and help in terms of the midterm and preparing for it. There is no PowerPoint for this lecture. I'll be going through the midterm with you and hopefully reminding you of things that you should be aware of in terms of being able to do your best and perform your best on the midterm, because that is certainly what I hope for each and every one of you, that you will do so and be able to do so. That being said, this is kind of open-ended, just me talking to you as I would if this were an in-person course. The class session before midterms for my in-person courses, I always had as a review, giving students also the opportunity to ask questions about the material, about the lectures. That obviously is not possible here and now because this is a one-directional way of doing things. But if you have questions, please, I hope I've always stressed, please email me. We can go back and forth over email. We can schedule a Zoom session or what have you to talk about the material so to enable you to ask questions in terms of preparing for the midterm. Now, I hope you also know that there's no firm deadline. The date given, the due date for the first midterm is February 9th by 11:59 p.m. If you can get it done and submit it by that time and feel good that it's your best work, then fantastic, because that is the basis for let's say the normal progression of the course. And if this were an in-person course, that would be when the first midterm would be due, period. But since this is an online asynchronous course, as I said, I think in the opening lecture or so, or certainly in the introduction to the course document, I think you should have the right to go at your own pace, except for the final, of course. But it's best if you don't get too far behind, because this course, there's a lot of work for it, there's a lot of reading for it, and if you just put it off, that's going to be a problem later on down the road. So anyway, I don't want you to feel stressed about that deadline, because if you turn it in on February 11th, that's absolutely fine. And you're still basically on track. So don't worry about that, but you should be ready to submit your first midterm as close to February 9th as you possibly can. So far, no one has already submitted it, and so that's in some ways no one is that far ahead yet, which I'm pleased with, because I'm not any further than I am at this lecture right now in terms of the lectures and stuff. But with this is the last lecture before the midterm, and so then the course will be absolutely complete in terms of available through the first midterm, and I'll be getting lectures for thereafter posted as soon as I possibly can as we go along. Now, that being all said, focusing on the midterm at hand. I just want to show you and talk with you about what the midterm entails. Now, you've had it available, and there are several documents that you should look at and read and go through before actually starting to write. Not only the midterm itself, and that is the document, the Word document, midterm 1, which is posted both in course documents and in the module midterm 1. That includes the guide to writing the exams, which applies for both midterms 1 and midterm 2. You should read that pretty carefully. You should go through again and review the syllabus in terms of what we have done, what we have covered, and the source readings that have been assigned, and the textbook readings that have been assigned. And then you should look at the terms to know for midterm 1. Those are the documents that are going to be very important for you in order to do as well as you can based on the expectations, because part of this talk is sharing with you what I expect. And what I expect is the basis for my grading of your midterm. So that is what this is about. Now, having said that, the basis for grading your midterm, what I expect that you will be examining or examined on, and demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of is the course material. That means the textbook, the lectures, and the assigned source readings. In your exam, you'll need to demonstrate your grasp of all three of those components of the course. This is a take-home, quote-unquote, course exam. This is a take-home course, so to speak. The very worst way to go about it would be to Google things. I mean, I'll come back and read through the midterm with you, parts 1 and 2, and the questions there, and analyze those questions. But the first question, dealing with Cardinal Richelieu and his testament, if you just Google Richelieu testament and then summarize what you find on Wikipedia or whatever, that won't be sufficient. I'm not testing whether or not you know something about Cardinal Richelieu or his testament. I'm testing what do you know of the course material, the textbook, the lectures, and the readings that apply to the questions being posed to you. So these are not abstract questions that you can just come up with any kind of an answer. They are based on the course material. So even if you gave a brilliant answer, but if it wasn't based on the course material, it would still be a 0. You can say that's not really fair. Well, yes, it is, because I'm being very explicit, and I have been from the very beginning. The basis of the grading is the course material, the assigned textbook, the lectures, and the other assigned readings that have been posted. And I hope that's clear. If you have any questions about that, please ask. And this is very important. It's essential because I'm only going to be grading based on what the course material is, if that makes sense. Now, can you bring in other material? Yes. I would encourage you not to. I would strongly encourage you not to, because there's plenty of material in the lectures and the textbook and the sources assigned and posted for you to answer these questions with. There's no need for you to use any kind of outside sources. But if you choose to do so for some reason, number one, you must cite that accurately. Standard bibliographical reference and footnotes. Otherwise, that's plagiarism. It could theoretically be a supplement. It could easily be a detriment to your grade for the reasons I just kind of said, because the whole basis of grading your exam is the assigned course material, the textbook, the lectures, and the assigned readings. So again, this is, I can't stress this enough, because in my online courses, I have had issues with this with students, especially with students who don't follow the course of the course, so to speak, the progression of the course as intended. We kind of wait and towards the end, and then just kind of think they can write anything they want. They don't pay attention. They don't read the directions. They don't read the guide to writing the exams. If they've read the introduction to the course document, they did so long ago, and then they forget about it. Those are issues that I want to help you do as well as you possibly can. Now, on that basis, where do we go from there? If that's clear. And again, if you have any questions about any of that, just let me just ask. 2 parts. I detail the 2 parts in the guide to writing the exams. And the first part is worth 40 points. The second part is worth 60 points. The first part is a text analysis. The second part is a more general essay. A text analysis focuses on one of the assigned sources, but you can refer to as many of the assigned sources as you would like to apply to the problem or the questions given to you in that part 1 source analysis. So I just now want to go through and read that first part question to you, and we'll kind of dissect it a bit. What does Cardinal Richelieu's testament reveal about France in the first half of the 17th century? If Louis XIV is considered as the epitome of absolutism, what does Richelieu's testament tell us about quote-unquote pre-Louis XIV absolutism in France? Could his positions have been advocated 100 years earlier? Why or why not? Now, that is something that is designed to allow you to show what you've grasped of the lectures. Because, as I hope you know by now, the textbook really starts in 1648. Now, it goes back and picks some things up. It does talk about Louis XIII and does talk about Richelieu. So those are important aspects for that. But that last part of the question, in terms of could this have been done 100 years earlier, i.e., around 1523, no. Why? Because society was in a very different state in 1523 than it was in 1623. What happened? What made for Richelieu's statements to be possible? Now, there you have to really go into the details of the text. And here, you do need to cite the text in your essay and give page references to the posted text. And then references to the textbook, and then references to the lectures. The lectures, you just say, week 2, lecture 1, whatever is fine. Because it's asking you to say, okay, what is his position? When was it written? What was the context? What was going on in France when Richelieu presented his testament? What had it gone through? If you go back to some of the lectures, Henry IV had recently been assassinated. Louis XIII was relatively young. We got through the French Wars of Religion, coming out of the turmoil and controversies of the Reformation, that led to a new understanding. And one of the things I think, I have to go back and look, but I think I included in some of the lectures, which on absolutism and French absolutism and English absolutism, I certainly should have, and I usually do. So my apologies if this is coming at you all anew. But the absolutism, in terms of a ruler having absolute authority, was a development of medieval papal theory from the 13th on into the 14th century, especially with the Augustinians, Giles of Rome, and Augustinus of Ancona, advocating for the absolute rule of the Pope. Even if with Augustinus it was conditioned, and there could be bad popes, there could be popes that are wrong, etc., but the Pope was only answerable to God. So whereas Louis XIV said, l'état c'est moi, I am the state, popes had already said, I am the church. So what happens is not so much the theoretical theory of absolute rule as such, it is the absolute rule of a particular monarch within a nation state. What led to the development of the nation state? How did that come about? Because in 1523, there really isn't such a concept yet, even if it's there in embryo, so to speak. That is what this is kind of getting at, and saying, okay, what does this tell us about France? Because if we say Louis XIV, and I think I talked about Bossuet and divine right drawn from the very words of the Holy Scripture in lectures. It's not one of the assigned readings, but I think I talked about it in lectures. That was written for Louis XIV, in the context of Louis XIV. What is different between Louis XIV's version of absolutism and what Richelieu is doing? What's going on with Richelieu in France at the time? We're talking about colonialism. We're talking about trade. We're talking about, expansion. Those are some of the issues that need to be brought in here, in that all the material that has been assigned and presented. So every chapter, every word that has been assigned from the textbook, every source that I've assigned for you to read, and every word of every lecture comprises the course material. Now you can say, yeah, but I can't do all of that. You know what? I know that. I know that. The issue is, what do you choose and select from all of that material to deal with the question and problem given you? And the question and problem given you is, what does this text, the single text, Richelieu's Testament, tell us about, let's say, pre-Louis XIV France and absolutism or government within France before Louis XIV? And how is that possible that was written at that time, and couldn't it have been written 100 years previously? And if so, how so? Why so? And I think you'd have a very difficult time arguing that. You might be able to. You could potentially, but I think it would be difficult. But you could say that no, it wasn't possible. But then why? You have to explain your reasons and present an argument. And you can say, okay, well, you just said you could argue that it could have. How so? Well, because in some ways, this idea of absolute rule with papal monarchy and papal absolutism was not the only absolutism of medieval Christendom, because the emperor also saw himself as an absolute ruler. And I believe in the early lectures I talked about Marsilius of Padua, his defender of the peace, who argued that we should get rid of the Pope altogether, the papacy, and that the legislator, or in this case, the emperor, he was writing for Louis of Bavaria, basically was an absolute ruler. The emperor had the say. So you could argue that what Richelieu is putting forward is not all that different from the imperial theory of rulership and lordship of the later medieval period, as we see with Marsilius of Padua, and on with imperial pretensions of being the vicar of God, etc., etc., etc. The divine right of kings was a medieval concept. So you could argue that, but then you have to show how the nation state was not around at the time. You have to deal with the difference between Christendom and the emergence of nation states as the overarching myth. Or you could say, no, it's not possible because the nation state wasn't around, and the absolutism of Richelieu was different from papal absolutism, or even the absolutism of the emperor and the divine right of kings of the medieval view. So you have to be very analytical and precise. And the more precise you can be, the more detailed you can be, and the stronger your argument supported by the evidence, the better it is. Now, that's the other thing, evidence. Is part of your grade, is how well you defend your position. It's not the position you take as such. There are no right or wrong answers on any of these questions I ask. So I'm not saying, do you get the right answer? I know what the right answer is, and how close do you get to it? That's not what this is about at all. This is about all the course material. How do you analyze all of the course material? Formulate an argument based on the case that is given to you. And how do you defend it based on the course material? Now, you should also read, I think, if you haven't already, you should review, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, the historical argument document in course documents. Because there I really relate historical argument with legal arguments. It's about presenting evidence and making a case. So I'd strongly suggest you do that, because that is what your grade's going to be based on. How strong of a case do you present based on the available evidence? What's the available evidence? The course material, the lectures, the textbook, and especially the assigned documents. Now, for this first part of the course, we only have the Confession of Augsburg, Richelieu's Testament, Petition of Rights, and the English Bill of Rights. I think are the sources that have been assigned for this first part of the course. I've talked about a lot of others in lectures, so those are all available for you too. And if you can cite what Hobbes said based on the lectures, that's good. Okay, that's a help. So in some ways, even though this first part seems to be very focused and narrow, which it is, you should try to bring in as much as you possibly can to demonstrate your grasp and understanding of the course material. That's what it's about. And I hope that helps in terms of that first question, in terms of part one. If you have questions about this, again, please just ask, because I think this is really important that you understand what I'm expecting from your answers and how I'm going to grade your answers. Because this is not an abstract question. It's based on, again, for the umpteenth time, whatever it is, um, it's based on the course material. The same applies to question 2. So now let's move to question 2, or part 2, sorry, part 2. Part 2, which is worth 60 points, is broad. And that is the intent of the part 2 question. And that will be the same on the second midterm, same format. And the question for part 2 is, if the emergence of early modern Europe can be seen as the transition from the myth of Christendom to the myth of the nation state, what were the primary components of the myth of the nation state that render it as early modern? Or in other words, what were the distinguishing characteristics of early modern Europe that distinguishes the period from Kirk of 1513 to 1789 as early modern rather than as medieval? And does the designation early modern apply to all aspects of society and all social groups, or to only a select few? Or in other words, what is the evidence that legitimates the designation early modern to describe European society and culture from approximately 1530 to approximately 1789? Answer these questions based on the course material and be sure to include political factors, intellectual factors, religious factors, social factors, and economic factors, which then was the primary factor that served as the catalyst for the historical change we observed during this period. Now, you may be saying, oh my God, how can I ever answer that? And I would reply to you, you can't. Not in a essay, not even in a relatively short essay. You can write books and books and books and books and books about it. Books and books and books and books and books about early modern Europe and what constitutes being early modern have been written. So it's not that abstract question. It's based on the course material. Again, how do you apply it to these questions? So let's look at the question and kind of break it down and analyze it, because that's part of the exam itself. What is the question asking? How do you attack it and approach it? Number one is saying, okay, how do we characterize early modern Europe as distinct from medieval Europe? If we have those definitions or those conceptual understandings in place, once we have that, how do we get from one to the other? This goes back to that opening line. Was it the shift from the myth of Christendom to the myth of the nation state? What else was involved? Was it reason? I mean, that's I hope no one will do this because I've stressed it so much in lecture. I hope no one will say the differences between the medieval culture, medieval Europe, and early modern Europe is that medieval Europe was an age of faith and early modern Europe was an age of reason. That will be not a help. Why? Because it completely ignores the lectures. Now, you can disagree with the lectures, but if you do so, you need to explain why and on what basis you do so. It can't be based on your personal opinion and belief. I'm not going to grade personal opinions and beliefs. You're entitled to your own opinions and beliefs. What I can grade and will grade and do grade is how well you defend your arguments based on the course material. So if you want to say that the Middle Ages, or at least the later Middle Ages, was an age of faith, when people didn't use reason, you're going to have to present the evidence. You're going to have to present the evidence that I talked about too in terms of medieval science and the scientific revolution lecture, and show that I was wrong. That Adelard of Bath was simply not asserting the use of reason, but simply saying that for some other aspect to defend his faith or whatever you might want. And the point is, I think you'd have a very, very, very difficult time to do so. So things like that could be problematic. But disagreeing with me, I don't have a problem with. But you need to then address it, why and how, and then contrast what was presented in the lectures with what you are claiming and arguing and your basis for it. I hope that makes sense. And again, if not, please just ask. So that is what this question is getting about, is this period from approximately 1530 to approximately 1789, early modern Europe, from its early emergence to right before the French Revolution. how do we describe it? And why is it different? And was it different for all segments of society? In the previous lecture, I just said, well, for the peasantry, especially the rural peasantry, it maybe really wasn't all that different. But then for the proletariat, for the urban workers, for the bourgeoisie, the merchants, and the aristocracy, and so it was different in a way. And intellectually, it was certainly different. Why and how? So, what are the different components and aspects of society? What was the difference and impact of confessionalization, the growth of the bureaucratic state in the emergence of the nation state as the new myth? Those are some of the aspects that have to be involved in basing your argument on the evidence, especially the um, the sources can be a help. And here, I could say, here's point to one issue, which is part of the whole semester-long project, is the issue of rights, human rights. Because we really see the emergence of human rights with, as I said, with Locke and the Enlightenment, even if Locke didn't mean it to apply to all individual human beings, but as a very different approach from the rights and privileges that are associated with what order in society you were inhabiting, the nobility, the clergy, or the peasantry. So it's not that rights had never been thought of before, but it is that individuals have rights. And then the next step would be, do all human beings have rights? And that was being asked at the time in the context of the slave trade. And so even that question had not been asked before. And so that is somehow a very clear difference between medieval Christendom and early modern Europe, or medieval Europe and early modern Europe, was this whole issue and emergence of rights. The overturning of the Ptolemaic system was something new. The use of reason wasn't. Even the use of the scientific approach of let's observe and theorize to account for what is observed. I've argued that was the same in medieval as it was in early modern. But in terms of the scientific revolution, they started actually experimenting. There's thinking about it. So inductive rather than deductive. And then what they saw blew everybody away. So the whole cosmology was gone. What about the discovery, the age of discovery? Okay, it was in 1492. Columbus sails the ocean blue. Okay, but still, that is not maybe early modern, but it contributes to it. And when we start really then having colonialization, the whole world was different. By 1600, we're living in a very different world than we were in even 1500 and certainly in 1400. What led to that and what brought it about? Again, not in an abstract sense, but based on the course material. That's the key. The page numbers that are given in terms of expectations, two to three pages, and then 4 to 6 or something like that. Those are all minimums as they are stated there. And you can write 30 pages on each question if you would like, as long as it pertains to making your argument. Okay, there's no upper limit. I hope you will take this exam seriously. If you have any questions about any of it, please shoot me an email. Review the documents that are there to help, namely the guide to writing the exams and the terms to know, because those terms to know are your guide to what to include. It doesn't mean that you have to include all of them. It doesn't even mean, and I certainly don't grade based on them. I don't have the list of terms to know, on my desk as I'm grading and saying, oh, I check this, check. You got, you got 92% of the terms you mentioned, so you get a 92% of your exam. That's not how I go about doing it whatsoever. But that is what I expect you to know. Out of all of this material, those terms, what they are, why those terms are important, and how they function within the whole are kind of, let's say, the distillation of what I expect you to be able to know and to deal with in terms of the exam. That's why they're there. Because as I've already said, there's too much material. But those terms to know help you get through it. That does not mean that you're limited to them, but it does mean that they represent to you what I expect you to know. Now, this is not an in-person Blue Book exam, um, meaning it's not based on what you memorize. You might, say, "Oh, if I get something mixed up, that's okay." And I certainly in the Blue Book exam give leniency for it. This is a take-home open book exam. You can work on it for as long as you want. There's no excuse for getting things wrong. As I said, there's no right or wrong answers, but you can get things right or wrong. And there's no excuse for getting things wrong because you can look them up. You can, work on it with all the information right before you. It's not easy. There's a lot of work that will go into this exam. Now you may say, yeah, but I've read your policy and it doesn't really matter because I can just toss this off and not worry about it because if I do better in the final, my final grade will replace my midterm grades. That's true. The final is comprehensive, so this is like helping you prepare for the final. The better you do now, the better you'll do in the final. I can almost guarantee you. So please give yourself the chance and give yourself the opportunity to do as well as you can in the midterms. That will help you for the final. Now, I think that covers basically what I wanted to say. Please do pay attention to the instructions on midterm 1, which are also there, talked about in the guide to writing the midterms in terms of using Times New Roman font, double space, and all of that. I just expect people to follow the rules. It's not that difficult. And so if you turn in an exam written in Courier or an Arial, single spaced, will I still grade it? Yes. It will also irritate me because what it screams out to me is, I don't care. And if you don't care about your exam and about your work and presenting yourself, why should I care about, giving you the benefit of the doubt or anything else? Now, if you submit it in something like Chiller, they'll probably send you a 0, and that will be that. Don't be, because then it's almost like a conscious opposition, so to speak, which I don't take kindly to. So just follow the directions. It's easy. It really is. I'm not a stickler on those things. Just do your best in some ways is my point. And realize too that what you submit, you're submitting yourself. I've often made the analogy, of how many of you would go to a job interview for a job that you really want, a more professional type of job. I'm not talking about McDonald's or whatever, but a job. Not setting your alarm, hoping you get up on time. You get up, you're kind of late. You just throw on whatever clothes are on the floor. You don't take a shower, get yourself ready, and you run in for the interview. How many of you would do something like that? None of you. I know that. Why? Because it doesn't matter if you were the best person for the job, you would not get it. Why? Because how you presented yourself would scream, I don't care. Even if you do. The same applies to your exams. What you submit represents you. So put your best foot forward and proofread it before submitting it. Once you think you're all done, great. Stop a minute, print it out if you possibly can, and proofread it or have someone read it to you because reading it aloud is the best way to proofread. And having someone read it aloud to you is even a better way to proofread. To make sure it's in good shape and form because you're presenting yourself. You're presenting yourself. Keep that in mind. Okay, that was the last piece of evidence or piece of advice I'd like to offer. Again, if there's any questions about any of this, please just let me know. Send me an email and we'll go from there. I'm also open to reading drafts. Now, policy on drafts. I always make this offer. I'll happily read a draft. with a proviso that if um, I get, 10 drafts on the night before it's due, I'm not going to be able to get to them. Now, even though there's no fixed due date, that still kind of applies because, just to let you know, for me, um, I've scheduled the exams not only in terms of the course as such, but also in terms of my own work. And so that is an issue. So if you send me a draft on February 8th, if you're one person sending me a draft on February 8th, I'll do my best to get to it before February 9th. I rarely have students send me drafts. So there's rarely a problem in terms of me not being able to get to all the drafts. And I understand that. I mean, we're busy. I know that. I know you're all busy, and I know this is not the only course you're taking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to make the offer. And if I get overwhelmed and swamped with drafts, I just can't get to them all, I will announce that and let you know. Okay. And in some ways, that would be a wonderful thing. And then we can adjust and go from there. But that's never ever happened, or nowhere near anything like that has ever happened. So, just as a offer, if you would like me to read a draft, go over things, I'm not going to correct it in detail, but I'll say maybe you should bring in some more information here. Your argument here is kind of weak. I can give you general points of feedback, if that makes sense. So please, I'm here to help you. That's what this talk has been about. And that's what my offer of reading drafts is about. So take me up on it and see how it works out for you. But anyway, I'll be giving a similar talk in preparing for the second midterm, even though it'll be probably a bit more abbreviated because I won't cover the same, I won't repeat the same exhortation, so to speak, that I repeated here. And it may just simply remind you of some of the context. So know what you need to know, which is kind of the key. Focus on the questions. Focus on how you can best analyze all the course material to apply it to this question. Once you say, okay, based on all the course material, what do I think about how this question can be answered? And then make your case. Make your case. The stronger your case and the evidence that it's based upon, and your presentation of the evidence that it's based upon, the better your grade will be. There we go. Again, any questions, just let me know. And good luck on the midterm. I look forward to reading them. And then we move on to the next part of the course. Take care. Bye-bye.